In this lesson, what we're going to do is spend some time taking a look at a timeline on the February Revolution, which is going to give you a detailed insight and oversight into how it began, what eventually happens, how it escalates, and how we get from what began probably in earnest with a number of strikes in Putlov and also strikes in Petrograd on International Women's Day in response to rising bread prices and meat prices, all the way to the escalation of the Tsar having to abdicate. So how do we go from that to this, is essentially the question that I'm going to ask here. And really, we're just going to do it through a timeline. So as I mentioned in the previous lesson, on the previous video looking at the February Revolution, on the 18th of February 1917, according to the Julian calendar, workers at Petrograd's Putlov factory began to launch a strike, demanding wage increases as well amidst the sort of skyrocketing costs. Now, while the February Revolution is sort of collectively understood to have begun on the 23rd, with the International Women's Day protesters marching, calling for bread and peace, and calling for a greater amount of bread amidst the rising prices. While that happened, we can see that there is already unrest that is taking place. There is already unrest as early as the 18th, which spreads by the 22nd into a major event, a major riot, which then spreads on the 23rd to just basically everybody in Petrograd beginning to protest and march, calling out for bread and peace. They would soon be joined by thousands of workers, the workers from the Putlov factory, as well as all the workers from any other factory that existed in Petrograd at the time, leading to widespread protest throughout Petrograd. That's on the 23rd of February. 2 days later, by the 25th of February, 200,000 workers across all of Petrograd were on strike, bringing factories and public services in Petrograd to a complete standstill. So nothing is happening at this point. Protesters are clashing with police authorities, and unrest is beginning to intensify. How do we go from, in the sort of 18th to 25th of February, mass strikes to a revolution? There's a big jump there between these things. Well, one of the issues was that a day later, on the 26th of February, the Tsar himself orders troops to fire on the demonstrators in a way that is reminiscent of the 1905 revolution, where the protesters that were protesting at the time, it was things, sort of socio-economic conditions, as well as the failure of the Tsar in the Russo-Japanese War. They were going to peacefully present a petition to the Winter Palace, and they were fired on again by the Tsar's troops, which caused that revolution. In a similar vein, then, the Tsar is ordering troops to fire on demonstrators. Several regiments did open fire in some cases, which of course led to an even greater amount of rioting. But what's important is many of the troops began to sympathize with the protesters and began to refuse to follow the orders, and therefore began to mutiny. And so, really, the ways in which the Tsar was going to maintain law and order was through the military at this point. And because he opted instead for the order of firing on demonstrators, they began to mutiny. And this mutiny, again, would also spread like a hysteria. By the day later, by the 27th of February, mass mutinies broke out. Soldiers would begin to fraternize with the crowds, some turning on their officers as well. This at the same time, on the same day, on the 27th of February, we see the establishment of a Council of Workers and Soldiers Deputies, known as the Petrograd Soviet, being formed. Additionally, on the same day as well, a provisional committee of the State Duma asserted executive authority in Petrograd. And what this essentially did was take power in place of the Tsarist government in the capital. This was a provisional committee led by an individual by the name of Mikhail Rodznieko, who took the initiative to take over control. So all on the 27th of February, you have the mass mutinies beginning to break out. The the fact that the Tsar has now officially lost control of the military in Petrograd, the Petrograd Soviet is established, a workers' and soldiers' deputy council, and the Provisional Committee of the State Duma begins to assert executive authority. Now, what this does, because it's on the same day, and there's a thing that needs to be mentioned, is on the same day, you've got the establishment of the Petrograd Soviet, and you've got the establishment of a Provisional Committee of the State Duma, a provisional government. And what this does then is insert a dual power structure. You have the provisional government which emerges from the State Duma, that is part of the executive authority. And then you have the Petrograd Soviet, which is an emergence of the workers' and soldiers' deputies, a council of those. And this creates a dual power structure that we will get to in future lessons' time. On the 1st of March, on the 1st of March, we see the establishment of Order Number 1. This dual power arrangement begins to firm up. The Petrograd Soviet issues Order Number 1, instructing soldiers to obey only the instructions that did not conflict with the directives of the Soviets, and therefore undermined the imperial command structure. And then, therefore, a day later, on the 2nd of March, the Tsar himself abdicates. Under immense pressure and his authority is beginning to evaporate, essentially, we see the abdication of the Tsar. Now, we'll get to what happens with regards to the abdication, because just because there's an abdication does not necessarily mean that that would result in the entire collapse of the monarchical system. That was going to happen, but that wasn't necessarily that wasn't a necessary condition that was going to take place at this point. There could have been the favouring of another individual who would take the throne instead. Now, the problem with Tsar Nicholas and his family is that the person who would have taken the throne through tradition would have been his son. But his son was very, very young. He was very, very weak. He was a haemophiliac, so he would often get very ill. And so he overruled that in favour of maybe having the succession go to his brother, Grand Duke Michael. The problem with Grand Duke Michael is that he refused the throne. And so this effectively brought an end to 300 years of Romanov rule that began in 1613 and took us all the way to 1917. We'll get to the specific details of the Tsar and his abdication in a future lesson, but I want to then start thinking soon about the provisional government itself, the structure of the provisional government, the structure of the Petrograd Soviet, and the nature of the dual power structure that we have in Russia in this sort of interim period between the February and the October revolutions.